I never thought I would be so desperate to take the night shift at Disney's Grand Floridian Resort. But here I was, 3 months behind on my tuition and almost no other option. The pay caught my attention, 3 times the normal rate for a night shift. I had to ask myself why they were so desperate to hire. The interviews were surprisingly intense. For rounds, and each round got weirder. The first two were standard, with questions about competence. The third took place at midnight in an empty hotel conference room. The interviewer, a thin man in a spotless suit, didn't even introduce himself. All the while, he just kept repeating the same question in different words. How do you deal with loneliness? The fourth round was hardly an interview. We were put in a room and made to watch old Disney commercials for 6 hours without a break or explanation. One by one, the other candidates got up and left. I stayed. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was curiosity. But by 5 in the morning, I was the only one who had survived. A woman in a blazer walked into the room, smiled, and said, "Congratulations, Mr. Matthews. You start on Monday." During orientation week, things started to feel strange. A group of 20 new hires were going through Disney's famous training program. The smiles of the trainers seemed artificial. Whenever someone mentioned the night shift, the subject was quickly changed. By the third day, I noticed that of all the new hires, I was the only one being trained for the night shift. Mrs. Thompson, the day shift supervisor, was supposed to be training me for the night shift. She was a Disney veteran and was expected to have a ton of exciting stories. Instead, her hand shook slightly as she recounted the night shift protocols. "Nights are different here," she said during our last class. Then she handed me a thick blue folder. Between pages 393 and 395 was a yellowed page with small handwriting. Special rules for the night shift. Never respond to children laughing after 3 a.m. Even if it's just outside the door. The salary is 3 times higher for a reason. Don't ask about previous night workers. If you see Mickey Mouse between midnight and 4 a.m., make sure his eyes are the right shade of black. If you see employees wearing 1971 uniforms, don't interact with them. They're not employees. Never go into room 1901, even if you hear strange noises coming from there. That part was demolished in 1982. Animatronics sometimes appear in the hotel hallways at night, but only during a full moon. If you hear Walt Disney's voice over the radio system, follow his instructions immediately. If you have a sealed envelope, open it only when you see the Main Street electrical parade lights reflected in the lagoon. We haven't had that parade in years. I looked at Mrs. Thompson, expecting her to laugh and say it was a joke. But she just looked away nervously. "Follow the rules," she whispered. "Every one of them. And pray you never have to open the envelope." The next night, as I approached the hotel, I heard children's laughter in the darkness somewhere far away. And although I told myself it was just part of the game, something inside me shuddered. It wasn't a game. It had all started with a slight sense of discomfort the first night. Elevators that ran surprisingly fast. Lights in the hallways that flickered at times. And a silence that seemed too thick. I walked down to the lobby, checking to make sure everything was okay. The clock read 1:32 a.m. When I first heard it, a whisper. It was coming from the empty hallway. I moved closer, but the whispering suddenly stopped. There was only a statue of Mickey Mouse in the empty hallway, although I didn't remember it being there before. Her eyes seemed wrong, but I couldn't figure out why. At 3 in the morning, I heard a child's laughter. It came from the hall. It sounded like someone running and shouting happily. I tried to ignore it, remembering the first rule, but the laughter grew louder, closer. And then I heard something else, the creaking of a door behind me. When I turned around, the room was empty, but the door I was sure I was closing was now ajar. I quickened my pace. My radio suddenly came to life. "Stay in the main hall. And remember, don't look at the animatronic if it's moving," Walt's voice said. I don't know how it was possible, but it sounded more real than I had imagined. I ran into the main hall, closing the door behind me. It seemed as if the whispers and laughter had been left somewhere behind. A monitor hung on the wall with the footage from the cameras. And then I saw it. 2 employees in old 1971 uniforms standing in the hallway, staring straight into the camera. Their eyes were blank. I tried to call my superiors, but my phone didn't work. At 4 in the morning, I realized that the door to room 1901 was ajar. And even though my instincts were to run, something inside me made me move closer. There was a humming sound coming from the room, like an electrical one. I looked inside and saw the lights of the Main Street electrical parade flickering on and off in chaos. The static on the radio fizzled out, leaving a void of sound. But in that empty silence, I heard a faint, deliberate click like metallic joints shifting just outside the office door. My eyes darted to the clock on the wall. 2:55 a.m. Jimmy's words echoed in my mind. Always finish the rounds before 3. Always be inside by 3. He'd never explain why. Alone now, the answer lurked just beyond the door, and I had no choice but to face it. In my trembling hand, the crumpled envelope felt like a bad omen. Its warning had come too late. The silver key in my pocket was cold, its inscription nearly rubbed away. 1901. That room held the truth, the note had said. But it also held something else. The soft laughter began, faint at first, then building. A childlike giggle laced with something unnatural. And then, beneath it, the music started again. Slow, distorted, and grotesque. The Main Street electrical parade theme crawled through the air like a predator stalking its prey. A shadow passed under the door. It was impossibly large, shifting as if the very fabric of the thing defied physics. I froze, my heart pounding. The doorknob twitched, then started to turn. Instinct took over. I yanked the door open before my courage could falter. The hallway was empty. The laughter stopped. The music faded. But the silence that remained felt alive, oppressive. The beam of my flashlight sliced through the darkness as I stepped out, the air thick and cloying like cobwebs wrapping around my skin. Then I heard it. Golly, it sure swelled to see a friend out so late. The voice was cheerful, familiar, wrong. It rasped like an old recording played on a warped vinyl. My flashlight trembled as I turned. And there he was, Mickey Mouse. But this was no mascot. His red shorts were faded, stained with dark blotches that seemed too organic. His gloves, yellowed with age, hung too long on fingers that bent unnaturally. But the worst part was his head. Tilted at an unnatural angle, almost perpendicular to his body, it stared at me with eyes that defied explanation. They weren't black. They weren't any color. They swirled like oil slicks, reflecting my flashlight in impossible patterns. Then, slowly, dark liquid began to seep from them, trailing down his face like corrupted tears. "What's wrong, pal?" he crooned. "Don't you want to play with us?" His head snapped upright with a crack, the sound like splintering bone. I stumbled backward as his impossibly fluid movements mimicked my retreat. The wet squelch of his feet on the carpet made a rise in my throat. Behind me, 2 cast members in vintage uniforms materialized from the shadows. Their smiles stretched far too wide, their faces warped like melting wax. "Welcome to the Magic Kingdom," they said in voices layered with static and discord. The walls seemed to pulse. Children's laughter warped into a guttural chant, rising in a chorus that filled every corner of the corridor. Mickey's voice dropped all pretense, becoming a guttural snarl. "Time for the parade." The thing behind the mask grabbed my shoulder. The glove had torn away, revealing fingers like wet leather, tipped with jagged metal. "No more rules," it growled, its voice splitting into harmonic chaos. "Time to see. Time to stay. Time to play." I broke free, my breath ragged, and ran for the maintenance door. Behind me, the sounds of tearing fabric and grotesque transformation chased me. The cast members' uniforms rippled and split as shapes that defied reality began to emerge. The key rattled in my hands, but the lock turned. I flung myself into the darkness beyond, slamming the door behind me. I wasn't safe. The blackness was alive, swallowing my flashlight's beam within a few feet. The air reeked of damp decay, old metal, and something acrid I couldn't place. And then I saw it, room 1901. Its brass numbers gleamed in the oppressive dark. The door an ancient monolith carved from time. Trembling, I used the key. Inside, reality itself seemed wrong. Rows of cabinets stretched into an impossible void. Display cases lined the walls, filled with artifacts that moved when I looked away. Prototype character heads with twitching expressions, costumes that seemed to breathe, photographs that blurred and warped as if alive. At the center stood a desk piled with papers and blueprints, their margins scrawled with ritual symbols. Above it, a portrait hung of Walt Disney himself, his smile stretched too wide, his eyes swirling with the same corrupted energy I'd seen in Mickey. The papers revealed the truth. Walt's parks weren't just parks, they were conduits for real magic. But magic demands balance. For every dream conjured, a nightmare took shape. The rules were all that kept the horrors contained, bound by ancient incantations. Breaking them, even once, was enough to weaken the barrier. I had broken them. The grinding sound of metal echoed behind me. The air turned ice cold. Slowly, I turned. It was him, or what had become of him. The figure of Walt stood there, twisted and wrong, his smile cutting across his face like a gash. "Welcome home," it said in a voice laced with static and eldritch tones. "You wanted the truth. Now you're part of it." Figures emerged from the shadows, the corrupted cast members, the thing that had been Mickey, and others beyond comprehension. They encircled me, their bodies rippling and shifting as the walls pulsed with a living rhythm. "You have a choice," Walt intoned. "Join us in the dark or keep the rules in the light. But you can never leave." Now I know why no one quits the night shift. We don't leave, we become the rules. And I'm still here, waiting, watching, wondering who will break them next.